All right, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of the Cloud Ninja Podcast. Today we're going over Chapter 7 of Boruto TBV. And today, of course, the first thing that we're going to be talking about is the first thing that did happen in the chapter, which is Boruto versus Mitsuki. This right here, in my personal opinion, was like one of the more anticipated battles that we did actually have, simply because we already know Mitsuki's like a household name. Boruto still is as well. This, in my personal opinion, was like a big measuring stick for Mitsuki. One of the first times that we did actually get to see Sage Mode, and prior to the actual battle, Mitsuki did actually say that he was trying to go all out simply because Kawaki wasn't there to actually reel him back in, or he said something along the lines of that. But what was your thoughts about this battle as a whole, Meek?
When it comes to this battle, I thought it was very interesting that we got Boruto versus Mitsuki right away. However, as you go through the pages, you clearly see the power discrepancy between Boruto and Mitsuki. Yes, Mitsuki is incredibly powerful. Whenever he taps into the Sage Mode transformation, especially in the Boruto anime, Mitsuki always spazzes. However, when he runs into Boruto first tries to find reason with Mitsuki, asking where is Kawaki so I can talk to him. I'm not trying to hurt you right away. However, with Mitsuki's fixation, which used to be on Boruto and now that it's flipped onto Kawaki, thanks to the omnipotence jutsu, Mitsuki is willing to do anything to eliminate Boruto to protect Kawaki. And because of that, Mitsuki is too enraged and bloodthirsty to be talked to, essentially using talk no jutsu. And this is where Boruto essentially says, enough is enough, let me do what I gotta do. And Mitsuki tries to overwhelm Boruto by using snake clones, which to Boruto's dismay, he does look very unimpressed. Obviously, Boruto doesn't know the shadow clone jutsu, so seeing like 4 to 5 Mitsukis around him, he is not impressed at all. And once he realizes that Mitsuki's not going to be able to find reason with what he's saying, Boruto has enough, saying, I don't have time to play around, and casually destroys all of the clones in a matter of 2 pages. And one thing I gotta say about the art as well, obviously it's nothing too crazy like how Naruto was. However, the way Ikimoto has been displaying Boruto's power, especially in Two Blue Vortex, has been splendid. The way Boruto has been swinging his sword, displaying his Kenjutsu ability, casually destroying all of the clones with a couple of sweeps or so, is very satisfying to read page by page, especially as you see the panels of the lightning that is imbued by his katana. So that being said, once Boruto destroys all of the clones at once, they have basically a final clash where it's sort of like a Dragon Ball Z beam clash, but instead of it being a beam, it's like lightning that they both throw at each other. That attack cancels out, where Boruto ultimately gets the jump on Mitsuki, where Mitsuki realizes he is quite clearly outmatched. When it comes to this fight, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wish we got a little bit more of it. I do understand why they ended it off right there, because obviously there's something bigger that is coming, such as with these Shinju enemy villains. However, you quite clearly see how much stronger Boruto is compared to Mitsuki, as once Mitsuki realizes that he can no longer keep fighting because Boruto has his sword at his neck, he immediately depowers down. What do you think about them basically ending the fight in, I don't know, what, 10 pages or so?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of expected. We already knew Mitsuki wasn't going to be at Boruto's level. Boruto's the type of character, I talked about this before. Boruto is so strong that he makes all the elite characters look absolutely fodder. He came in and in his first battle made Code, a character who we already know surpassed Jigen. He made him look absolutely fodder, and he did the same exact thing to Mitsuki right here. One of the things that I do want to caution fans with is kind of calling Mitsuki fodder, simply because of what I just
Mm-hmm.
said. We can't really fully gauge Mitsuki's power simply because he fought a very strong opponent. Of course, because that the fight ended so quickly. And in my personal opinion, at this
Exactly.
particular point, I mean, one of the things that I do want to see, I want to see exactly who is actually going to challenge Boruto, specifically because it seems like Mitsuki's not supposed to be it. And honestly, with this entire fight, I kind of believe that it should have been more of like a Mitsuki versus Boruto thing. But I believe that Boruto writers, they essentially had this fight to kind of like plant the seed in the audience's memories, or even Mitsuki's. I feel like this right here was a big plot point, just planting the seeds about the sun and the moon dynamic. And of course, we're probably gonna talk about that a little bit later. But I thought that this right here was just a setup for the Boruto writers, and I think that when this actually does come to the anime, battle may actually be a bit longer. But I think overall, it was more of just like a plot thing. But in regards to like how the battle looked for Mitsuki, I don't necessarily think that Mitsuki had his best showing, simply because I feel like the Sage mode was like something that was super hyped up, and we kind of believed that it could have possibly rivaled some of the Otsutsuki members. In my personal opinion, and I talked about this in my predictions as well, I thought that Mitsuki should have pushed Boruto, even though we kind of knew he would actually lose. In this battle, it looked like Mitsuki didn't necessarily get a touch on Boruto, and again, I said Boruto makes all the strong opponents look absolutely fodder. I guess we could just chalk this up as one of those, but I kind of thought because we seen Mitsuki kind of instill a tad bit of fear in Urushiki's mind when he did come down during the tuning exam, when he did actually steal some of his sage chakra. He basically said this chakra looks unique, and then he pretty much put Kawaki out, so it's like 2 Otsutsuki members that Mitsuki's actually affecting. I thought it would kind of go as like Mitsuki. I thought a plot story could have possibly been that Mitsuki was kind of designed to fight against Otsutsuki members, and that could have possibly had some sort of effect on Boruto during the battle. That didn't happen at all, but regardless, I think one of the things that we can anticipate from Mitsuki is that he could possibly get stronger. I mean, I
100%.
I mean, a couple of reasons why he could possibly get stronger. First things first, he's a synthetic human being. You could pretty much load him up with all the scientific technology possible. One of the theories that I actually do have is that once he does make a choice, he may actually get stronger. During the first time that we did see him get the Sage Mode, it was like a mission that he had to go on with Orochimaru, and of course they were fighting against Log, and in that mission Mitsuki had to actually make a decision to listen to Log or listen to Orochimaru. And at that particular point, I mean, the whole point of the whole entire thing was to have Mitsuki make his own choices, and once he decided to go down his own path, then he unlocked the Sage Mode. I'm guessing if in a situation like this, if he does have to choose between Boruto and Kawaki, it's possible if he chooses his own path, then he'll eventually get a power up. That's my theory.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly do believe, as a whole, this wasn't necessarily that surprising simply because Boruto is that guy. I do want to see, again, who's going to be the first person to actually humble Boruto, because that's going to be like a crazy scene.
Boruto's catching bodies. First Code and essentially Mitsuki next. Obviously, he did kind of find his match with the Shinju enemies. However, it was a 4-on-1, so obviously he was disadvantaged. And even in this chapter, before they started scrapping, Mitsuki straight up said that Kawaki is no match for Boruto. So that's another key piece of information when it comes to the power levels between the 2 Otsutsuki brothers. And I think that's a very interesting note. And I highlighted in one of my previous videos that with Boruto being on the run and being hunted down by the Leaf Village and with Code, he was essentially forced to get a lot stronger in order to protect himself. Whereas with Kawaki, now that he knows that he wasn't being chased off like he used to in part 1, where the Kara members such as Jigen and Delta were trying to hunt down Kawaki by invading the village and trying to bring him back, Kawaki kind of got complacent. Now that he realized that he needs the karma in order to protect Naruto, and now that Naruto is in a safe place and he too is safe as well, he probably didn't anticipate that he had to get a lot stronger in order to kill somebody like Boruto, which is his biggest mistake. But anyways, moving on after Boruto subdues Mitsuki, Boruto immediately drops the bombshell that Boruto is Mitsuki's son. Now, obviously, this goes back to Mitsuki's philosophy on how he follows his will. Originally in part 1, it was through Boruto, but thanks to the omnipotence, it is now through Kawaki. And after Boruto tells Mitsuki this, Mitsuki kind of questions, why is Boruto saying this? And if you notice, right after Boruto says this, Mitsuki wraps a snake around Boruto, and that snake tries to attack him. However, the snake refuses to actually bite down onto Boruto's neck, which confuses Mitsuki even more, saying, how dare you say that you're my son? You have some nerve and audacity to say something like that. And this is where Boruto says, why hasn't the snake bitten me yet? But this is where Mitsuki realizes that his will is followed through Boruto.
Yeah, I completely agree. This right here, in my personal opinion, is probably going to have a lot more tentacles in regards to the future of the series. In my personal opinion, I think it's probably like inevitable. Mitsuki's probably going to understand that Kawaki's not the guy. I believe in chapter 1, he was already like questioning it. He was like, Kawaki, you're my son, like, aren't you? And just off of that, you kind of got the vibes that he and Kawaki would kind of split up. And in this particular chapter, you pretty much said it. Boruto did a very good job of like, I wouldn't necessarily say convincing Mitsuki, but like he did his part. And I think one of the things that was like kind of important for Boruto is like to not necessarily seem like he was forcing himself upon Mitsuki. And one of the things that he did actually say was that he believes that Mitsuki can actually shine upon his own, or shine on his own. And if he needed the help, he could actually find Boruto. I thought that was cool. One of the things that was kind of hinted towards at the beginning of the battle it kind of made it seem like that Mitsuki wasn't necessarily free with Kawaki. Mitsuki essentially said that he wanted to fight Boruto without deferring. And it kind of made it seem that with Kawaki he'd have to defer to Kawaki in a battle versus Boruto. And I understand that right there in itself isn't necessarily like anything too big, but it just shows that Kawaki is not necessarily himself with Kawaki, or Mitsuki is not necessarily himself with Kawaki there. In my personal opinion, it was kind of like the other way around with Boruto, where Boruto is essentially giving Mitsuki choices. Boruto is
Hmm.
essentially saying, Mitsuki, hey, you could choose, you could do this, you could do that. I think that right there is going to be one of the big things, like coming off of the heels of this particular chapter. In this chapter, Kawaki wakes up and he says something like, "Where is he? Where is that bastard Mitsuki?" And just off of that, you know that Kawaki is gonna like go off on Mitsuki when he comes back to the village, rightfully so. But like, it's still gonna have that seed. The seed is already planted in Mitsuki's mind that, hey, Kawaki might not be my son, and I'm doing all this stuff for a guy that is literally about to chastise me as soon as I get home. He's about to yell at me. So I feel like that right
Hmm.
there is probably gonna influence Mitsuki a little bit more to potentially join Boruto's side, or at least get more information. One of the things that we've kind of been seeing from this particular, or from these 7 chapters so far, is that information is pretty much having like the same impact, or even arguably more of an impact than it did in part one. The Shinju, all they're doing is pretty much looking for intel. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. Jura, he had a thing at the end of this chapter about intel. Amato, one of the things, and it goes back to part one. Amato, one of the reasons why he was so important was the intel that he essentially had. So I personally believe that this right here is going to continue on in TBV, especially with Mitsuki and Boruto, where Mitsuki just wants to know a bunch of intel, and I think that Boruto is going to have those answers for Mitsuki, and eventually they're going to link back up. I think the only question right now is that will Mitsuki eventually go rogue alongside Boruto? I think that's the big question.
Yeah, because if you notice, every time Mitsuki tries to get close to Kawaki, as you see in the first couple of chapters, Kawaki would kind of deflect those feelings away from him, telling him that, why are you around me so much? Get away from me. You're kind of being weird for acting this way, right? Whereas with Boruto, he embraced Mitsuki by being by his side, right? He never deflected those feelings. He kind of reciprocated that. Not only that, toward the end of the chapter, Boruto tells Mitsuki that he is perfectly capable of shining on his own, meaning that he can follow his own will. However, if he does need someone to help him, Boruto is quite clearly that person that Mitsuki can follow. Hence why it shows that he is actually his son. And finally, right before he does say that, Boruto drops another bombshell by telling Mitsuki and Shikamaru, who is overhearing Boruto speak to Mitsuki, by saying that Naruto is still alive and that he is safe. Which, if you actually do look at Shikamaru's reaction, he doesn't seem to be surprised at all. He doesn't have a crazy reaction. He's sort of thinking it away. And as we get to the end of the chapter, Shikamaru's having a discussion with Boruto on how omnipotence works. And since we do know that he was affected by omnipotence, despite understanding that very concept of it, since he was affected by the jutsu, the rules and how the jutsu actually properly operates, this will eventually fade away from his memory, since this is how the people that were affected will not remember previous events prior to the jutsu being activated through Kawaki's will. That being said, Boruto does tell Shikamaru that despite having your memory altered, for Shikamaru to remember that Boruto and Kawaki's places in the story are swapped, since Shikamaru was able to deduce that on his own.
Yeah, and to be honest, this right here is going to be like themed throughout the rest of the story, like what certain people know at this particular point. What does Shikamaru know? In my personal opinion, I think one thing that's probably going to stick with him, the video recording of Amato essentially saying that his daughter's karma, or his daughter's DNA, is in Kawaki's karma. And I think that right there could always be a trigger in Shikamaru's mind to say, hey, maybe this isn't necessarily the way it is, or maybe my memories were actually altered. Similar to how Sasuke, I believe he didn't necessarily know like specifically what was going on, but he always had that reference of Sora like kind of like begging him to protect Boruto, and that right there kind of instilled the belief that, hey, maybe Boruto is actually telling the truth, or believe it blindly without any proof, kind of what Boruto was saying. Believe it blindly that Boruto is Kawaki and Kawaki isn't Boruto without any proof. And I think that right there is essentially what's going to happen with Shikamaru, simply because there's a lot of other things in this particular chapter. Like, for example, I think it started off Sora telling Shikamaru that something is off, and then Shikamaru gets the video recording of Amato actually saying that Kawaki's karma still has his daughter's DNA. And I think that right there could have possibly contributed to Shikamaru actually having the notion to actually call Boruto. I think that Ino could eventually connect some dots with Shikamaru. Once Shikamaru does realize that, hey, I don't know why I called Boruto, heard the call. Heard Naruto saying that Naruto was alive. Heard Shikamaru call Boruto Uzumaki. This right here is happening where she doesn't necessarily know the guise of omnipotence yet. It wasn't necessarily explained to her. So I believe some of these things could possibly stay with her as memory, and they themselves, Shikamaru, they could potentially piece some stuff up to where they could actually stay informed or stay up to date, even though the omnipotence is kind of like rewriting their memories.
Exactly, 100%. And I think with Shikamaru realizing this, he does say something very important at the end of their conversation, that he doesn't want to expose Kawaki right away. Right now that he knows the truth of how this jutsu was activated through his will, he does know that Kawaki is a very homebody type of person. Once he forms an identity, he doesn't want to lose it right away. And now that he's snug home inside the Leaf Village, with Naruto being put away safely inside the Daikukoden dimension, Kawaki is not going to do anything but wait to kill Boruto and the rest of the Otsutskis for how many there are for the rest of this story. With at least Shikamaru, Boruto, and possibly even Mitsuki, once he actually gets more physical evidence, his mind was altered, they're probably going to turn on Kawaki, and Kawaki may, more likely or not, will get exposed as a fraud for what he did, for turning the story upside down onto Boruto and deflecting the blame, for essentially keeping the Hokage captive in his own dimension. I think that will backfire, especially toward the last 2 pages of the chapter, where Jura is trying to learn more about the world by reading as many books as possible. However, none of the information that he's reading about is giving him an answer. Hence why he says at the very end that he is going to go visit Naruto. And the one thing I gotta mention is, in chapter 6, Damon brings up that with these Shinjus, they weren't affected by omnipotence. They do know the truth that Naruto is still alive, whereas everybody in the Leaf Village, the people that were affected by the jutsu, they think he's dead. And if Jura, once he does come to the Leaf Village, which will probably happen, I do think he will confront Kawaki on how to get to Naruto, and will tell the people around in the village that Naruto is alive. And this will make Kawaki look very, very bad, to the point where this could maybe reverse the effects of omnipotence. Obviously, there's no complete answer to doing that, and I don't think that will be changed for a very long time. However, I do think Kawaki will get exposed very soon for the transgressions that he's done.
We might have to disagree on this one. Yeah, the thing with Jura, I feel like Jura would be no different from like a Sarada or a Sumide. Like Sarada and Sumide, they've been talking about this for a very long time. I believe, yeah, the first dialogue that we did actually get to see in chapter 1, it was Sarada essentially screaming at Shikamaru, saying, how many times do I have to explain this to you? So I feel like one of the things that I believe could give some credence of, or could possibly lead me to believe that Kawaki may actually be exposed, is because they've actually talked about it. Like Damon essentially said, if the Shinju come back to the Hidden Leaf Village and they say, won't you be exposed? That kind of leads me to believe that the writers are kind of giving me a hint towards, hey, maybe this time they may actually believe the other person. But I just find it hard to believe. First things first, they didn't believe Sarada, as I said, but also the Shinju would be kind of like outsiders or enemies. The Hidden Leaf Village, like, they don't necessarily treat them with like the most respect. I remember when Pain came to the Hidden Leaf Village and like no one liked him. No one wanted to hear what he was
no one
saying.
wanted to mess with him because he was an intruder.
Yeah, exactly. Even in the face of death. So I feel like that right there kind of makes me like not necessarily believe that that Kawaki will just be exposed if Jura comes in. But again, as I said, because Damon did actually say it, it might be the board to writer saying like, hey, this is going to happen.
Well, I do think they're planting the seeds for it. Obviously, if Jura comes into the village and just screams out, oh, Naruto's alive, nobody's obviously going to believe him, right? But if Jura finds a way to bring Naruto out of the Daikukoden dimension and have him inside the Leaf Village alive and well, that's where it changes, right? That changes the dynamic of the omnipotence jutsu, because everybody's minds have been essentially brainwashed to believe that Boruto killed Naruto. But if Jura brings out Naruto out of the dimension in front of everybody, in front of Kawaki and the village, that will expose what Kawaki did, right? So that's what I'm trying to get here. Of course, you're 100% correct. No one's going to take Jura seriously. They're going to just view him as a threat. However, I do think they're planting the seeds for that.
Yeah, I think they are too. One of the things that I don't necessarily know for sure, like hypothetically, if Naruto does get brought back, like does everything go back to normal? I know for Kawaki it probably doesn't, but like everybody would still believe that Kawaki is the son of Naruto, and just like Kawaki being the son of Naruto sealed his father.
I don't think it
right?
will go back to normal because by the time that does happen, I do think the Shinjus will evolve from there. Like, there's going to be more conflict. Like, we just got into Two Blue Vortex. We're only 7 chapters in. And even if people realize that, there's going to be bigger conflicts that are going to arise from Jura doing this, as well as the rest of the Shinju enemies. They have their own goals and they have their own characters that they want to kill as well. The conflict that's going to arise with Jura and the rest of the Shinjus coming to Konoha, I do think that will be so great that even if the village realizes that something is terribly off with Naruto being alive, especially if they do physically see him in person breathing alive and well, I do think whatever the Shinjus will bring, especially with Kawaki as well, let's not forget about Code, who's still sneaking in the background. I don't know where he's at, but I still think there's too many things that will come across that even if people will realize that, another conflict will arise. Right? We saw with Code when he attacked the Leaf Village with his Ten Tails army. Those Ten Tails evolved into something greater than what Boruto and Code both anticipated. Not to mention Kashin Koji.
As you just said, Kashin Koji hasn't necessarily been in the series for so long, but in my personal opinion, I think he's going to be one of the most important characters to the actual core function of it. When it comes to the Shinju, one of the things that's kind of questionable to me is if they'll stay resolute in their goals. For example, I feel like because they're learning so much information, because they're learning so much new things, it's possible that Jura, let's say in a couple chapters, let's say in the 10 chapters, he could possibly have a completely brand new goal. Maybe his target doesn't necessarily become Naruto because Naruto's information isn't necessarily the most. It's not necessarily the peak. Maybe he eventually goes after someone who knows more than Naruto, and that would be his new target. Because in this particular chapter, he seems like he's unsure of himself. He seems like he doesn't necessarily know everything, and he pretty much said that the more information he gains, he pretty much understands that he has more questions. I feel like it's not necessarily all the way concrete. And the same thing goes with other Shinju as well. They essentially don't necessarily know about the world because they were just a god tree. Eventually, if they get more information about the world, maybe their goals change.
So guys, that is Boruto Two Blue Vortex Chapter 7. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. What would you guys rate this chapter out of 10? And tell us, what are your predictions for Boruto Two Blue Vortex Chapter 8? So let us know about all of that in the comment section below. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell as well, and have a good day. Peace.